he would call her. I don't know if you saw his email or not. So he said he would call her today. Yeah. I sent it on to you, but I didn't feel like you would see it.
All right, Glenn, let's figure out how this looks on Noam. So where is a cowboy underneath the thing? Perfect. Look, it's perfect. That's part of the cowboy. It's one of the rules weekdays. Like that. You don't have to. That looks great. Yeah, it looks really good, actually. It really does. Yeah, it really does. It looks very good. Let's go forward.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I think this, you can just tuck up here.
I got more stuff for you.
Okay. All right. Look, no, we just tuck this up or whatever. Just tuck up inside. And this is the thing for your neck is under there. I'll show it to you later. Put this all together. All right, I'll get Chris.
Don't get
I'm not right now, but after. I know. This is an extra old-fashioned.
It's electric.
I could get mine now. That's great.
Yours are different.
You know my mother's boyfriend Al who stole all the cookies for you from the hospital? Let me try this just in case. This is one of those fisherman's hats. Oh, it's too small.
Wait.
It's cute though. All right, so you want tea?
Yeah.
Oh wait, I got you. Well, that's the way to my car. I brought my car.
I'm trying to get to ask a question back.
I don't know if it's broke.
Curious to see. Yeah.
No, I got you cough loss.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
That's
there's
great.
my car. They're right together while you're. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I think that change it to permanent. Okay.
Have to get your throat back.
Yeah.
I was doing here a long time ago. Patrick. Patrick Pauly.
I do have a new name.
That's the one.
Appropriated in my hospital.
I don't even know. We're taking it over.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Eric.
How are you?
Dan.
Hi.
Great, so we're all
what's up?
we're all set up.
Over there.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about?
So Reddit is a social news site. This is a post we put up the other day. We got a lot of requests to interview you. I just wanted to show you that it got almost 2,000 questions or comments, and so
2
people.
seconds per question.
But I have a list here of 10. But if
Okay.
I know you have limited time, so if we get to 3, great. If we get to
Is he using that or? Is
no,
it
I just wanted to.
Okay.
You want this
back
thing
have some
hidden?
tea for his throat, so.
Do you want this hidden? Or
Yeah, hidden if
any particular complexion to it, or?
So Reddit was started by programmers,
Mhm.
so it still tends to be kind of a lot of computer science people. But I think you'll see from the questions, some people
Okay.
have various science backgrounds, and but it's fairly
Okay.
fairly
Why
young,
don't you close the door?
Yeah, okay.
fairly young.
Okay,
Fairly.
can you get this thing high enough so it doesn't rub against the sweater? Okay.
And I'll save a few minutes for the end because one of the things we like to do with our interviews is give you a chance to ask a question back to Reddit, if you want to. Totally optional.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be about a broad topic or something very specific, or just sort of
Okay.
more of, yeah. So, great. So yeah, these are the questions, and what would be great. So these are the usernames of the people who.
Okay. Do you want me to read them? Or?
So yeah, if you can read the username,
I see.
and then read through the question.
Okay.
This third one's a little long. I don't know if you want to. If you feel like jumping in after part of it, that's fine. But yeah, if you can read the username here. Some of them are not easy to pronounce because they're made for the internet. So just do the best, and yeah, I'll keep an eye on time. We'll get through however many we get through. If you can just read the top one, just read a test sound here.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, and if you need to take a break,
Okay.
I know your throat's bothering you.
Let's get started. No, it's okay.
Great.
It's permanent. Yeah. Just start off?
Yeah, maybe introduce yourself.
Okay. The first question here is from Cocoon56. Do you currently see an elephant in the room of cognitive science, just like you named one 50 years ago? I guess that's a reference to my critique of radical behaviorism. Something that needs addressing but gets too little attention. Well, one thing that I think gets too little attention in the room of cognitive science is cognitive science. Most of the work that's done just doesn't seem to me to bear on cognitive science. I could pick up a couple terms here and give examples. The cognitive science ought to be concerned should be just a part of biology. It's concerned with the nature, the growth, the development, maybe ultimately the evolution of a particular subsystem of the organism, namely the cognitive system, which should be treated like the immune system, or the digestive system, the visual system, and so on. When we study those systems, there are a number of questions we ask. One question is, of course, what they are. Can we characterize them? But that's almost totally missing in cognitive science. I mean, take my own particular area of interest, language. A ton of work in what's called cognitive science on what they call language, but it's very rare to see some effort to characterize what it is. Well, if you can't do that, it doesn't make much difference what else you do. The second kind of question you have to ask about any organ, if you like, loosely, subsystem of the body, is how it gets the way it is. So, how does it go from some initial state, which is genetically determined, to whatever state it assumes? And in investigating that topic, there are a number of different factors that you can take apart for analytic purposes. One is the specific genetic constitution that's related specifically to this system. That doesn't mean that every piece of it is used only for this system, but just whatever combination of genetically determined properties happens to be to determine that you have a mammalian rather than an insect visual system, for example, or a gut brain, or whatever it may be. That's one. The second is whatever data are outside that modify the initial state to yield some attained state. And the third is how do laws of nature enter into the growth and development of the system, which of course they do overwhelmingly. I mean, nobody, for example, assumes that you have a particular genetic program to determine that cells split into spheres, not cubes, let's say. That's due to minimization of energy, other laws of nature, and the same holds throughout the course of development. Of course, the same is true for evolution. Evolution takes place within actually a specific physical, chemical channel of options and possibilities, and the physical laws enter all the time into determining what goes on. And the third question is that. It's kind of like a why question. Why is the system this way, not some other way? Well, there again, you go back into, at this point you really are facing, first of all, just historical accidents like, an asteroid hit the Earth, but more significantly, how do the physical and chemical properties of the universe enter into determining that certain evolutionary changes take place under particular circumstances? Well, that's the array of questions that ought to be asked. But it's very hard to find any focus on these questions, at least in the areas of cognitive science that I'm particularly interested in, like language, for example. What you have is extreme efforts, which are sometimes extremely strange, to try to show that trivial problems, for which we basically know the answers and have for 60 years, can be somehow dealt with by a massive data analysis. So, I could give examples, but in fact I've written about examples. But I think it's kind of off track. I'd like to see cognitive science focus on the topics that it ought to be addressing. Now, this is a very broad brush, so a lot of it does, and there's very good work in cognitive science, but it's, in my opinion, much too restricted, and a lot of the time and effort is spent, in my view, largely wasted on peripheral issues which just don't make any sense, which you look at them, and efforts which just collapse constantly. In fact, many of them are kind of a residue of the radical behaviorism that the field sought to overcome as it developed. Could give examples, but it's a very general, broad brush feeling. Unfair to a lot of very good work, but trying to pick out tendencies which I think are off track, missing things. Second comes from the silent number. What are some of your criticisms of today's anarchist movement? How to be as effective as possible is something many anarchists overlook, and you're perhaps the most prolific voice on this topic, so your thoughts would be very influential. I don't agree with the last comment, but my criticisms of today's anarchist movement are a little bit like the critique of cognitive science. What is today's anarchist movement? I mean, there's quite a lot of people, in fact, an impressive number of people, who think of themselves as being committed in some fashion to what they call anarchism. But is there an anarchist movement? I mean, can one think of, is there something like, say, during the day, 20 years ago, I happened to be in Madrid, it happened to be May Day, and there were huge May Day demonstration, hundreds of thousands of people from the CNT, the old anarchist labor organization. Well, I can have all kind of criticisms of the anarchist movements in Spain and so on, but at least there was something to point to. There was something there. There was something to criticize or to support, to try to change or whatever. But today's anarchism in the United States, as far as I can see, is extremely scattered, highly sectarian. So each particular group is spending a great deal of its time attacking some other tendency, sometimes doing useful, important things, but it's extremely hard to. I think what is this is not just true of people who think of themselves as anarchists, but of the entire activist left. You count noses, there's plenty of people. I mean, more than there were at any time in the past that I can think of, except for maybe tiny, very brief moment in the late 60s, or a CIO organizing in the 30s and things like that. But there are people interested in all sorts of things. You know, you walk down the main corridor at this university, you see, you know, desks, students, very active, very engaged, lots of great issues, but highly fragmented. There's very little coordination. There's tremendous amount of sectarianism and intolerance, mutual intolerance, insistence on my particular choice as to what the priorities ought to be, and so on. So I think the main criticism of the anarchist movement is that it just ought to get its act together and become, accept divisions and controversy. You know, we don't have the answers to what all the answers. We have maybe guidelines as to what kind of society we'd like, not specific answers. Nobody knows that much. And there's certainly plenty of range of room for quite healthy and constructive disagreement on choice of tactics and priorities and options. But I just see too little of that being handled in a comradely, civilized fashion with a sense of solidarity and common purpose as to how to be as effective as possible. Yeah, that's exactly the point. What should we address? Don't have to give a list of severe problems that the world faces. Some of them are extremely severe. And so, for example, there are really questions of species survival, literally. At least two, maybe more. One of them is the existence of nuclear weapons. Somebody watching from Mars would think it's a miracle that we've survived for the last 60 years. And it's extremely dangerous right now. So I can't see that that can fail to be a priority. And the other is a looming environmental crisis. And that is something that anarchists in particular should be very dedicated to addressing, because it involves, on the one hand, it does involve questions of technology, like can you get solar power to work and so on. And the anti-science tendency in anarchism, which does exist, is completely self-defeating on this score. I mean, it's going to require sophisticated technology and scientific discoveries to create the possibility for human society to survive. I mean, unless we decide, well, it just shouldn't survive. We should get down to, 100,000 hunter-gatherers or something. Okay, except for that, if you're serious about, the billions of people in the world who have their children and grandchildren, it's going to require scientific and technological advances. But it's also going to require radical social change. I mean, there's been particularly in the United States, but it's true elsewhere too, there have been massive state corporate social engineering projects, very self-conscious, don't hide what they're doing, since the Second World War, to try to construct a social system that is based critically on wasteful exploitation of fossil fuels. That's what it means to suburbanize, to build highways and destroy railroads and so on through the whole gamut of planning that's been undertaken. Well, that means very substantial social changes in order. And anarchists ought to be thinking about it. Now, thinking about it doesn't just mean I'd like to have a free and just society. No, that's not thinking about it. We have to make a distinction if we want to be effective. That's the question. If we want to be effective, we have to make a distinction between what you might call proposals and advocacy. I mean, you can propose that everybody ought to live in peace, love each other, we shouldn't have any hierarchy, everyone should cooperate, and so on. Okay, it's a nice proposal. Okay for an academic seminar somewhere. advocacy requires more than just proposal. It means setting up your goals, proposal, but also sketching out a path from here to there. That's advocacy. And the path from here to there almost invariably requires small steps. It requires recognition of social and economic reality as it exists, and ideas about how to build the institutions of the future within the existing society, to quote Bakunin, but also to modify the existing society. That means steps have to be taken that accommodate reality, that don't deny its existence and say, I don't like it, I'm not going to accommodate it. These are the only ways to be effective. You can see that if you look at the serious, substantial anarchist journals. So take, say, Freedom in England, which maybe is the oldest, or one of the oldest anarchist journals that's been around, forever. If you read its pages, most of it is concerned with mild reformist tactics. That's not a criticism. It should be. It should be concerned with workers' rights, with the specific environmental issues, with the problems of poverty and suffering, with imperialism and so on. Yeah, that's what you should be concerned with if you want to advocate long-term significant social change towards a more free and just society. And I can't think of any other way to be effective. Otherwise, the insistence on purity of proposal simply isolates you from effectiveness in activism, and even from reaching or even approaching your own goals. And it does lead to the kind of sectarianism and narrowness and lack of solidarity and common purpose that I think has always been a kind of pathology of marginal forces, the left in particular, but is particularly dangerous here, which gets to the next sentence. From Berserk R.L., there's a long question, but just summarize it. Suppose we favor a stateless society in the long run. It would be a mistake to work for the elimination. I've said that it would be a mistake to work for the elimination of the state in the short run, and we should be trying to strengthen the state because it's needed on the check of power of large corporations. Yet the tendency of a lot of anarchist research, my own too, and others, is to show that the power of large corporations derives from state privilege, and governments tend to get captured by concentrated private interests. That would seem to imply that the likely beneficiary of a more powerful state is going to be the same corporate elite we're trying to oppose. So if business both derives from the state and is so good at capturing the state, why isn't abolishing the state a better strategy for defeating business power than enhancing the state's power would be? Well, it's a very simple answer to that. It's not a strategy. And since it's not a strategy at all, it can't be a better strategy. The strategy of eliminating the state is back in the level of let's have peace and justice. How do you proceed to eliminate the state? Okay. Can you think of a way of doing it? I mean, if there were a way of doing it in the existing world, everything would collapse and be destroyed. But you just can't do it. There's nothing to replace it. If there was a rich, powerful network of cooperatives, community organizations, worker control of industry, extending over the whole country and the whole world, in fact, yeah, then you could talk about eliminating the state. But to talk about eliminating the state in the world as it exists is simply to keep yourself in some remote academic seminar or a small group, saying, gee, this would be nice. It's not a strategy, so it can't be a better strategy. We are faced with realities. What is described here, and in fact it's true, I've written plenty about it too, is that we have a number of systems of power, closely interlinked. One of them is corporate power, business power. That's by far the most dangerous of all. That means effectively unaccountable private tyrannies. A second, pretty closely linked to them, is state power. And the comment's correct. As the commentator says, I've written about it too a lot, that state power tends to be overwhelmingly influenced by concentrated private power. Okay, those are real problems. Now we face strategies. So, for example, say take say healthcare, okay, right on the front pages. What's the strategy for dealing with the fact that, that tens of millions of people that can't get the best health care they can get is to be dragged to an emergency room when it's too late to do anything? I mean, that's a real problem. And that's a huge part of the population. Second problem is that in a privatized, unregulated healthcare system, like the United States, and I shouldn't say like because it's the only one, in a privatized, unregulated healthcare system where the drug companies are so powerful that the government isn't even allowed to negotiate drug prices. In that kind of system, first of all, healthcare is strictly rationed by wealth, very strictly. And secondly, it is designed in such a way that the federal budget is going to be destroyed. You just take a look at the tendency lines. There won't be anything left for schools, for Social Security, for worker safety, anything. What will be left is for the military. That's untouchable. Keeps going up. Another problem we ought to look at. Obama has the biggest military budget since the Second World War. So, but as long as that is over there, untouchable, another elephant in the closet, the radically inefficient, privatized, unregulated healthcare system is extremely harmful for people, except for the wealthy. They do fine. And is also going to destroy everything else. So what do we do about it? Well, it's not a strategy to say, okay, let's abolish the state. That doesn't do anything about it. In fact, it's just a gift to the corporate state power sector because it offers nothing. A short-term answer is to do what the large majority of the population has wanted for decades, and namely to develop a sensible national health care system of the kind every other industrial country has, one variety or another. Well, it has to be a large majority of opinions, so you don't have to break down many walls to organize people about it. It has been for decades. It's strongly opposed by the corporate state nexus, but that's not unbreakable. You know, bigger victories have been won. We could go into details, you know, like what do you do about the fact that the Democrats have sold out for obvious reasons, not even minor palliatives like a public option and so on. What do you do about the fact, let's say a concrete fact, there was just an election in Massachusetts which surprised everyone, totally, almost completely misrepresented, but we'll go into that. But one of the striking things about the election was that the union members, Obama's natural constituency, most of them didn't bother voting because there was tremendous apathy in the poorer and working class areas. The election was won by the wealthy suburbs. But of those who voted, most of them voted for Scott Brown, the Republican, against the Democrats, shooting themselves in the foot, incidentally, because one of the first things that happened is to knock off one possibly pro-union member from the National Labor Relations Board, but they had reasons. The reasons are very clear, just read the labor press. The reasons are that Obama made it very explicit that he was not willing to compromise or give up on everything except one thing, taxing union members for their health care plans. So sure, people are enraged about that. You know, why shouldn't they be? It's not an anarchist position, it's a simple, elementary human position. Well, okay, if you're interested in the long-term project of the questioner, namely dissolving state and corporate power, you should be paying attention to that. You should be organizing workers on that. You shouldn't leave it to Rush Limbaugh to organize people with real legitimate grievances. And that's the way to fascism. You should be out there organizing them themselves on their concerns. Their concerns can be related to, and easily related to, much longer term anarchist-style projects, but that's where anarchists should be working. And the same is true in every other part of the society. I mean, some of the things that are going on now are kind of surreal, but would offer real opportunities for anarchist organizing. So let me take another one. The tendency in the economy for the last 30 years by state corporate planning, these things don't happen from out of the blue, has been towards financializing the economy, and a corollary to that is undermining domestic production. Okay, the two go together. So, for example, the share of financial institutions in GDP, of course, domestic product was maybe 3% back in 1970. Now it's approaching a third. And concomitantly, productive industry is being dismantled, which is fine for the owners. Great with them if they can produce in, Mexico or China or something, but it's terrible for communities and workers. At the same time, it's finally being recognized, even by the corporate elite, which has been fighting bitterly against it for years, that there's a real environmental crisis coming. And they're going to lose what they own, so they want to do something about it. And so what they're now kind of timidly saying is, well, we should not be the only country in the world, in the industrial world, that doesn't have high-speed rail. We should have high-speed rail, minimal but significant move towards dealing with a severe potential crisis. Well, right at this moment, the government and the corporations are dismantling productive industry in, say, Michigan and Indiana, like closing GM plants and so on, and sending the production abroad. They're doing that. That's one thing they're doing. The other thing that's happening is that Obama's transportation secretary is in Europe, in Spain, using federal stimulus money, mainly taxpayer money, to try to get contracts for Spanish firms to provide high-speed rail that the United States needs. Can you think of a better thing? I mean, it's hard to think of a more dramatic criticism of the state corporate socioeconomic system. Here are communities and workforces being destroyed while their tax money goes to purchase in Spain what they could be producing themselves. Now, if you can't organize about that, you're really in trouble. You're not a movement at all. Of course, should take, say, the workers in Gary, Indiana, or Flint, Michigan, and so on, do they have to just sit and watch this happen? No. They can take over the workplaces, the factories. They can run them themselves. They can convert them. It's been done before. There's much greater conversion during the Second World War to work-on production. They'll need state support for that, because that's the only institution that exists, and the only one that people can influence. You can't influence a private tyranny. You can influence the government. It's often been done. It would take some support, but nowhere near as much as bailing out Goldman Sachs and so on. But it would take some. It would take a lot of popular support, but it can be done. It can even be done within the framework of conservative economic theory, which is pretty straight about this. You read textbooks on corporations that say, it's not graven in stone that they should work only for the benefit of shareholders, which means a tiny percentage of wealthy shareholders. They can work in the interests of stakeholders, meaning workforce and community. And they're not going to decide to do that, but the workforce and the community can decide for them. Those are perfectly feasible efforts. In fact, it's been done. You know, there are cases where it's been done. There's cases where it's even been tried on a very large scale, like U.S. Steel, and came close to succeeding. It could with more corporate support. Well, you know, these are, you could go on with this, but these are real organizing strategies which combine short-term efforts which confront real problems that people face in their everyday lives with long-term objectives, like creating part of the basis for a society based on free association, solidarity, popular control, and so on. And it's sitting right there in front of our eyes. Those are, in my view, are the things we should be looking at, not abstract questions like, should we try to destroy the state, for which we have no strategy. My feeling is that's the direction in which, kind of direction in which thinking ought to move. It doesn't mean giving up your long-term goals. In fact, that's the way to realize them. And if there's another way to realize them, I've never heard of it. Please.
Professor, sorry, I think we're getting close to time here.
Oh.
So about half an hour.
Okay.
So, but if you want to ask a question back to the community,
Well,
I think you'll get a lot of responses.
I guess the question that comes to mind that just grows out of these comments is there's a very large number of people who are committed sincerely and rightly to the kind of long-term objectives that anarchists have always tried to uphold. And the question is, why can't we get together and decide on, and instead of condemning one another for not viewing things exactly the way we do, why can't we try to formulate concrete proposals which combine two properties. One, dealing with the real problems that people face in their immediate daily lives. If you're going to get anywhere, you're going to have to deal with those. And it's not just for tactical reasons, it's also out of simple humanity. So on the one hand, those, while maintaining as your guidelines the conception of the kind of just and free society that you would like to bring into being through these steps. And sometimes the two are very close together, as in the case that I mentioned, like takeover of a productive enterprise by workforce and communities, which is not, it's a feasible objective, and one that has a great deal of appeal, would have if it were put forward, as do others, and combines both the long-term vision and the short-term dealing with real existing grievances and problems. And there are quite a few things like that. So the question is, why not focus on that rather than on abstract questions, such as, what's the best strategy for destroying the state? Answer, well, no best strategy because nobody's proposed any.
Great. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get through most of these.
Oh, no, yeah. But yeah, maybe if I could email them to you and you have a chance to answer some of them, I can post them, and I know our community would appreciate that. Or I don't know what your schedule's like today. If you have time to answer, whatever that would be. That'd be great too. But I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Well, I'll tell you what, if anybody wants to write me an email,
Okay.
So could I come down and answer? Probably spend 6-7 hours a day or a night answering, so I can answer some more. So is the community that is involved in this mostly sort of anarchist in tendency?
As a whole, I would say not necessarily, but I think, when we announced that we interviewed, those are the ones that really are.
There's a strong sub-community of anarchists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's a
That's good to hear. Okay, sorry I'm so rushed, but that's life.
we appreciate the time you're giving us.